it is, I guess, a misconception in Israel that war will solve the problem, just ongoing, continual war. But what it does is just create the next conflict. The only thing that is going to solve this problem is a diplomatic solution. And yet there's an attachment to violence and a greed for land on both sides that stands in the way of that.
Welcome to the LBJ Presidential Library in Austin, Texas. I'm Mark Updegrove. As an author, journalist, television commentator, and CEO of the LBJ Foundation, I've had the privilege of talking to some of the biggest names and best minds of our day about our nation's rich history and the pressing issues of our times. Now we bring those conversations straight to you. The attack on Israel by the terrorist group Hamas on October 7th, 2023, has led to a bloody war and irrevocably changed the Middle East. Tonight, we begin a two-part interview with Pulitzer Prize-winning author and New York staff writer Lawrence Wright, whose latest book, The Human Scale, provides nuanced insight into the complex history and deep-seated divisions between Israel and Palestine. Larry Wright, welcome.
Thank you, Mark. It's good to be with you again.
Welcome back to the LBJ Presidential Library.
It's an institution in this town. I really appreciate it.
Well, we're delighted to have you. So I want to talk about your latest book, which goes back to the Middle East, where you have great expertise. You've written several books about the Middle East, including The Looming Tower, for which you won the Pulitzer Prize, that revealed the road that led up to 9/11. But this is a novel. What led you to write The Human Scale?
You know, I had spent a lot of time in the region, as you say, and it was a combination of grief and frustration and anger. You know, this has gone on for such a long time. You know, I'm about the same age as Israel, and I often think about it's a young country, but I'm an old man, so, you know, there is some sort of correspondence. In my lifetime, all these impossible things happened, like apartheid ended. We elected a black man president. The Soviet Union dissolved. These were all things we thought would never occur, and they did. But this conflict just goes on and on and on. And it has consequences worldwide. You know, America's been implicated, and, you know, we've lost people because of this conflict. Osama bin Laden, revenge about Palestine was a big part of his motivation. So, you know, the whole world suffers because of this agonizing conflict. And it's not easy to wrap your head around the entire thing, but I thought it was best done via fiction than non.
You write in the book, a rule of thumb in this region is that wherever peace seems near, a spoiler will arise. Extremists on both sides were inflamed and intent on destroying any compromise.
Yeah.
You were writing specifically about the 1990s, but the statement took on a larger context. That seems to be the problem that we have in that region just generally.
Yeah.
Extremism seems to prevail. Why is that region so rife with extremism?
Well, part of it is religious fundamentalism on both sides. You know, the jihadi impulse is, to some extent, the wellspring of it comes out of the conflict in the middle, in Israel and Palestine. But and then you have the idea on the part of, especially a lot of the settlers on the Jewish side, that God gave this land to us and it's ours and nobody else should live here. And that is such a misbegotten notion. You know, the idea that the Palestinians are some invaded force, you know, some sea people, as they were sometimes called. They came from someplace. They were always there. And, you know, it's interesting to me that David Ben Gurion and Yitzhak Ben Zvi, Ben Gurion was the original prime minister and Ben Zvi was the second president of Israel. But when they lived in New York in the early part of the 20th century, they wrote a book about the Israel they foresaw. And in there, especially Ben Zvi, you know, he had done all this study. He'd walked through the Palestinian villages. He saw menorahs in the windows. He saw Hebrew in the graveyards. And he realized that these people, they never left. There was the great diaspora, but not everybody left. And the people that remained are the Palestinians. And, you know, originally they probably were Jewish, but then they converted to Islam in order not to pay taxes, or they converted to Christianity. But they're the same people, and genetics have shown this, quite clearly. In fact, the whole region is essentially the same people. So the idea that that they're something other than us is totally mistaken. Last time I was in Israel, or not the last time, but one of the times I was in Israel, I was doing a one-man show that was called The Human Scale, upon which this novel sprang forth. I thought, I'll be giving them the news, and they'll all, oh, we didn't know that. No, they go, oh yeah, we know that. It didn't matter. The conflict has created its own cause for being.
What are other misconceptions that cloud our view of that region?
I think the most important misconception is that peace is not possible. It is possible. You know, Camp David Accords that Jimmy Carter brokered with Anwar Sadat, an assassin, and Menachem Begin, a terrorist, and Jimmy Carter, a one-term Georgia governor. These are the people that made peace between Egypt and Israel, and it's endured since 1979. You know, it's the first and still the most durable peace treaty in that region. And these three men had the courage, the political courage required to make the sacrifices that would bring peace. It is, I guess, a misconception in Israel that war will solve the problem, just ongoing, continual war. But what it does is just create the next conflict. You know, the only thing that is going to solve this problem is a diplomatic solution. And yet there's an attachment to violence and a greed for land on both sides that stands in the way of that.
Why did the Camp David Accords work? What was the secret to that binding agreement?
Each side sacrificed as much as they could, but not more than they could. And so the principal object of the Egyptians was to regain Sinai. Sadat had started the 1973 war with a surprise attack on Israel, which really caught them off guard. And there was great fear. They were digging mass graves in public parks in Israel. This fear of, that they were going to lose. It wasn't like the '67 war. It was the reverse. And, Israel acted out of a sense of terror. And they gained Sinai, and once they had Sinai under their control, they got kind of used to it. They had beach reports in Tel Aviv about swimming in the Red Sea and stuff like that. And they weren't about to give it back. And Sadat wasn't going to stop until he got Sinai back. And, Israelis really liked having that expansive, it's a very small country, and to have that great expanse of Sinai, which has biblical and historical references to Judaism. It was a big sacrifice. And Begin suffered a lot politically. And Sadat was assassinated. So, and Jimmy Carter lost the election. So it didn't do any of them any good politically, but they realized they had higher goals than just continuing the conflict over year after year. And, so Israel's greatest enemy was Egypt. And, it's been retired from that category for half a century now.
What do you want readers to take away from The Human Scale?
I think that one of the problems that people have with regard to the Middle East is that they have stereotypes in their mind that are very durable. Who are the Israelis? Who are the Palestinians? Who are the Arabs? Who are the Jews? These stereotypes. I won't call them misconceptions, but they're just firmly embedded, so that if you are firmly in the camp of the Israelis, you look at the Palestinians, no doubt, even an open-hearted person thinks of them as more inclined to violence and less interested in peace. And the reverse is absolutely true. So both sides are, it would take a monumental reorientation of the public mind to open the idea that peace is possible. But it's the only possibility for a resolution to this. My feeling is that the peace solutions that have been proposed so far have been too small for such a profound tragedy. And as nutty as the Gaza beach proposal of President Trump, the idea of creating something rather than just managing something is something I would look forward to. Open up new ideas. I think you could bring in kind of a regional settlement. The idea of Saudi Arabia and Israel making peace, that's a very important thing. Israel could be comfortable in that part of the world, but it would require a peace agreement that would be durable and profound. And it's not on the table yet, but there's so much going on in the Middle East right now, such a volatile moment in its history, that I don't know what might happen. But I think, and mark me down as an optimist, I think it's a better time to try to make peace than has been in years.
You alluded to President Trump's proposal to take over Gaza and drive out the Palestinians. Is that a foolish notion?
It's beyond foolish. It's dangerous. The Palestinians were driven out in 1948 and 1967. That's why Gaza is what it became, a vast outdoor internment camp, 20 miles long and 7 miles wide at its widest point. 2 million people crammed inside it. And most of them have never been outside of Gaza. Generation after generation, people have been essentially imprisoned in this. So yes, it could be a resort. It is on the Mediterranean, and but the Palestinians have reacted as one would expect an oppressed and driven people to react, angrily and occasionally violently. And this isn't going to change that. It's going to make it worse. Well, I think if we follow this proposal, we'll have a rebirth of terrorism that is going to be really, really dangerous. And yet, as I said, this is an opportune moment when everything is in play. Other leaders in other countries in the region will be looking for an agreement that would settle things down. And the only thing that really will settle things down is a true agreement between Israel and Palestine.
Last year, we saw activism on campuses across America around the plight of Palestinians in Gaza. Did that activism surprise you?
Yeah, because until now, I haven't seen a very strong constituency in favor of the Palestinians and especially the people in Gaza. Sympathy, in a distant way, but not activism. And the spread of it, the width of the extent of this uprising was really, it caught me off guard. It may have affected the election in some respects. And it's certainly not just true of America. Europe, was riven by these protests. And they're feckless. They just replicate the anger that you find in the region, and it's identity politics in a way. I'm a Jew, I'm a Palestinian, or I am anti-Jewish, I'm anti-Semitic, and or I'm anti-Palestinian, anti-Arab, anti-Muslim. That's a form of identity politics. And when you get into that, you don't brook any response. You're only exercising your right to holler and intimidate people. And that's the Middle East. I had this old Egyptian playwright named Ali Salim. He's passed away now, but he was a great character. And one time when I was in Cairo, he had this big, long, rubbery face, and he had gotten sort of excommunicated from the intelligentsia because he had driven to Israel one time just to see what it was like. Anyway, he said, you know, the United States is now a Middle Eastern country, and you're going to have to think very old thoughts. Well, we're too young for this.
What was behind the activism? Was there some sort of external force at work that led young people to be more aware of what was happening in the Middle East than they might have been attuned to other problems throughout the world?
Well, you know, October 7th is the precipitating event. And, you know, there was a period of enormous grief especially among Jews in America, and anxiety at a really high level. So from that point of view, you could understand the reaction. But then the consequences of this immense bombing campaign, which, you know, in the first year, I think the Israelis used more ordnance than the U.S. did in Afghanistan in the entire run of that longest war in our history. So it looked like a war of extermination. And so there was a lot of alarm of people, just, you know, a widespread number of people who felt that they had to do something. And, you know, expressing your opinion is a wonderful thing in America that you can do that. But opinions only go so far,
Right.
you know, and, you know, we're already a very divided country, and no doubt the Russians abetted, you know, with bots and stuff like that, trying to enlarge the divisions, and we're so susceptible to that kind of influence. So it's hard to parse how much of that was outside influence. But I think you can easily say that there would have been a reaction anyway. And there is a lot of anti-Semitism in this country that rarely comes into view as starkly as it has during these protests. And I'm not saying that people that are protesting are all anti-Semitic by any means, but there are some. And you know, Mark is a historian. You must look back at, you know, at the Weimar Republic and, you know, the other instances, you know, in our own history where, you know, there was a rise of public feeling that was dangerous and led to catastrophic political consequences and wars and so on. And I feel very strongly that we're in such an upsurge moment. And where it plays out, you know, I am unable to see the future of it. But I see the elements being quite dangerous, and these protests are just an expression of how on edge the country is, how it's about to explode at any moment, and causes like this mark these changes in our country's civic life and drive us further apart.
So we talked about the extremism that's endemic to the Middle East. We are seeing extremism flare up in America, and part of it is a new surge of anti-Semitism. What's at the root of that?
Well, identity politics is, you know, a big part of it. You know, if you are standing for your people, let's say your people are white Christians, then the acquisition of power by other groups, whether it be minorities, people of color, people of different religions and so on, is a threat to you. And it has to be responded to. So there's that. There's always been with anti-Semitism, a class element, the assumption being Jew plus money
Right.
equals, ruling the world. And that was, that kind of anti-Semitism is what led to the rise of Nazism in Europe. It's also the case that people feel strange. A lot of people feel hostage to Israel's behavior because we give them the weapons to pursue their wars, and also support them in other ways, just as, acquiescing in moving the capital to Jerusalem, looking the other way when Israel acquires land through combat. These are all enabling actions on our part, and people who don't agree with it feel dispossessed, and so they take to the streets. And what other recourse do they have?
What is the long-term solution for peace between Israelis and Palestinians?
Well, the long-term solution would be that they agree to live with each other without hating each other. And it's hard. Our own country has struggled with this, and look at our original sin is slavery, and it's perpetuated itself even till today, but attenuated now in part because of LBJ and all the great society programs that have helped make America more comfortable with itself. The funny thing is, you can go to Brooklyn and see Arabs and Jews living together very peacefully. And so they go to the same grocery stores, the same restaurants, the same food habits, and all this sort of thing. They're very similar people. And outside of the context of the Middle East, they get along very well. It disproves the notion that they can't live together. But it does drive people crazy. I know this is extraneous, but I have to tell. In Haaretz yesterday, there was a story. This is a leading newspaper in Israel. A Jewish guy in Miami shot two people in a car because he thought they were Palestinians. And they didn't die, but they were wounded. But it turned out they were Israelis. And they reported that they were shot by a Palestinian, and it was a hate crime. And then suddenly there was this vast, never mind, but the lunacy that is afoot, and oftentimes you see on our campuses, the anger that drives people crazy. Unfortunately, the protests have seemed to have died down somewhat now, but they only were replicating the hatred of the Middle East. They weren't proposing solutions. They were just carrying over the antagonism and adopting it as their own, which one of the problems with the Middle East is that hatred is a luxurious emotion, and it allows you to put all your troubles on somebody else's shoulders and blame them for whatever is going on. And it's hard to break that. Love is more difficult, but hatred is easy.
As you look at a region which has been troublesome for certainly our lifetimes, is there anything that gives you hope for long-term peace in the region?
Not yet. I see the possibilities because I've seen how peace can be structured and made to work in the Middle East. So now there are other players that are, the Jordanians, the problem with the refugees is that they tend to capsize other governments. And the Middle East is awash in refugees, not just from the Palestinians, but from the Syrian war and from Lebanon. And, it's just more refugees than during World War II. And many of them not being educated, especially this is true of the Syrian refugees. So, they've gone through what would be their entire, elementary school years without actually getting instruction. What's the destiny of such people? And, how do they balance the scales? Because that'll be what's on their minds. You know, without addressing the problem of refugees, and certainly without creating more of them, which is what the Trump plan would do.
Yeah.
You know, we're gonna be dealing with the consequences, the violent fallout of that for the rest of our lives and probably for our children.
The book is The Human Scale, and our guest is Pulitzer Prize-winning Lawrence Wright. Larry, thank you so much for being here.
Mark, it's always a pleasure. Thank you.
This program was funded by the following: Laura and John Beckworth, BP America, Joe Latimer and Joni Hartgraves, and also by A complete list of funders is available at aptonline.org and live from lbj.org.